Welcome to the Explainer. Go ahead and close the door, pull up a chair, and get comfortable, because what we're about to go through is a highly confidential briefing meant strictly for senior executives. We're taking the centuries-old and, frankly, pretty ruthless wisdom of Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, and we're translating it directly into the modern corporate battlefield. Look, if you're facing high-stakes decisions, maybe a hostile takeover or massive internal restructuring, this right here is your survival manual.
I want to immediately hook you with this question. It's a bit of a paradox, but it's right at the heart of our source material today. Will being the nice guy actually bankrupt your company? You see, what works perfectly in the idealistic, glossy pages of an employee handbook often fails absolutely catastrophically when you're in a high-stakes survival scenario. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why playing nice isn't always playing smart. We all know there's the PR version of leadership, right? It's that illusion that a leader can be universally virtuous, universally liked, always doing the popular thing. But you have to contrast that with what Machiavelli calls the real truth, what we'll call the boardroom reality. He argues that attempting to be entirely good among so many who are, well, not good, is going to eventually lead a leader and their entire organization to absolute ruin. Sometimes the mere survival of the firm demands harsh, incredibly unpopular choices.
All right, here's our boardroom reality playbook for today. First, we'll look at the Pragmatist mirror. Second, restructuring and radical realism. Third, the M&A conquest playbook. Fourth, crushing legacy corporate opposition. And finally, we'll wrap up with the acquisition control checklist.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The Pragmatist's Mirror.
Our very first concept draws heavily from Chapter 15 of the text, where Machiavelli explicitly warns against the dangers of what he calls imaginary republics. He's basically telling us to stop obsessing over how things should be and start looking at the real truth of how people actually live and work. He warns, a man who wishes to act entirely up to his professions of virtue soon meets with what destroys him among so much that is evil. Machiavelli has literally zero time for imaginary corporate utopias. He focuses squarely on how human beings actually behave when power and money are on the line.
Which brings us to the concept of the necessary villain. The text literally states that a leader must learn how to do wrong and use that knowledge when necessity demands. Think about it this way. Being the nice guy is great, right up until the company goes bankrupt. Sometimes you have to play the villain, making those deep layoffs, cutting a beloved legacy project, or playing absolute hardball in a negotiation just to save the jobs of the other 90%.
Moving right along to Section 2, Restructuring and Radical Realism.
So, how do historic military conquests translate into modern corporate restructuring? It requires what we call radical realism. This means making those tough, agonizing, unpopular decisions that might look like a vice to the outside world, but ultimately bring long-term security and prosperity to the firm. What the PR department frantically spins as a vice, the boardroom absolutely must recognize as vital to the company's future security. Now keep this dynamic in mind during any acquisition. Machiavelli notes that men change rulers willingly, hoping to better themselves, but experience soon shows they've gone from bad to worse. It's the exact same in the corporate world. When you acquire a new company, those existing employees will initially welcome you. They're hoping for bigger budgets, better perks, you name it. But the harsh reality of restructuring means you will inevitably have to burden them with difficult changes and new corporate realities during the transition.
All right, Section 3, the M&A Conquest Playbook.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how ancient government structures map perfectly to modern org charts. Not all targets are the same, so they require vastly different strategies. Machiavelli compares the kingdom of the Turk, which is highly centralized, governed by one lord with everyone else acting as his obedient ministers, to the kingdom of France, which is highly decentralized, filled with powerful nobles who command their own loyal subjects.
Let's look at the centralized target first, the Turk model. This type of company is incredibly hard to acquire. Why? Because the entire organization is fiercely loyal to one powerful CEO. You aren't going to find any rogue vice presidents willing to help you force a buyout from the inside. However, if you do manage to buy them out, it's incredibly easy to hold. Once you remove that top executive, there are literally no powerful middle managers left with enough independent authority to challenge you. But contrast that with the decentralized target, the French model. This structure is super easy to penetrate. You can always find a disgruntled legacy manager or regional VP who feels underappreciated and is more than happy to help you oust their CEO. But fair warning, Machiavelli points out that holding on to this kind of company long-term is nearly impossible. Those exact same powerful managers who helped you, yeah, they'll eventually get frustrated and form fresh corporate movements against you.
Which brings us to Section 4, Crushing Legacy Corporate Opposition.
So the ink is dry on the deal. What do you do with all that legacy opposition? Machiavelli strongly advocates for sending colonies rather than massive armies. In our context, we call these corporate colonies. Instead of sending in a bloated, heavy-handed oversight committee, you send a small, highly effective elite integration team to secure the newly acquired department. The text notes this is incredibly cost-effective because you only have to displace a tiny minority of the acquired company's staff, just enough to give your elite team the desks and the direct authority they need to take control.
The alternative is what we'll call the garrison trap, and it's a nightmare. If, instead of a small colony, you maintain a large, hostile, and super expensive C-suite overlay to constantly police the new acquisition, it just drains the company's revenue. And even worse, that constant disruption makes every single employee in the new division feel the hardship. You end up turning the entire workforce actively hostile against you.
And that leads to one of the most ruthless yet absolutely vital lessons in the entire text. Listen to this. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, of more serious ones they cannot. When dealing with legacy middle management, you must either fully embrace them or completely remove them. Firing a VP totally removes their ability to hurt the firm, but giving them a partial demotion or just slashing their budget, that only breeds incredibly dangerous corporate revenge.
Okay, let's wrap this up with Section 5, the Acquisition Control Checklist.
We're going to distill all this historical ruthlessness down into a highly actionable checklist. The source material contrasts two very different approaches. The Romans achieved flawless, absolute security by dismantling conquered cities, maintaining minor powers without increasing their strength, and sending in those colonies. Conversely, King Louis XII made a string of disastrous compromising mistakes in Milan. He failed to reside there personally, he didn't send colonies, and worst of all, he actively empowered a rival, the Church, which eventually led straight to his ruin.
So the crucial point is this 4-step checklist for corporate consolidation. Don't delegate this. Step 1, reside there personally. Set up your desk in the new acquisitions office so you can spot and resolve issues immediately. Step 2, send those low-cost corporate colonies to establish your culture. Step 3, extinguish the previous leadership family. That means completely removing the old C-suite to prevent any loyalist uprisings. And Step 4, maintain absolute control. Never ever rely on the power of a rival executive.
Because Machiavelli's ultimate warning, his golden rule of power, is simply this: he who is the cause of another becoming powerful is ruined. If you rely on another department head's resources, or you help an ambitious rival VP gain authority just to secure your own temporary position, I promise you they will eventually use that exact same power to orchestrate your downfall.
Which brings us to our final thought. We've looked deeply into the pragmatist's mirror today. We've seen that the reality of boardroom survival often requires radical, unpopular, and sometimes harsh decisions that your PR department would absolutely never approve of. So I leave you with this question. When the time comes to make the brutal calls necessary to secure your company's future, are you prepared to step out of the employee handbook and play the villain? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes open out there, and I'll see you next time.